Good morning, distinguished leaders, respected elders, traditional authorities, senior professionals, members of the political class, clergy, academics, business leaders, and influential stakeholders. Thank you for your invitation. I'm extremely honored and humbled to speak with you all today. What brings us together today is not politics in the ordinary sense. It is something heavier. I'm not speaking to you as an ordinary activist. I'm speaking with you as a humanitarian as well, as an agent of change, and as someone who is also an architect of psychological frameworks. And over the last 10 years of advocacy, education, the empowerment of our people, I've earned my right to be here. So what brings us together today is not politics in the ordinary sense. It is something more heavier. It is the burden of history arriving at the doorstep of a generation and asking a simple but unforgiving question. Who among you today is prepared to lead beyond self-preservation? Because history has a way of approaching quietly before it is suddenly before it suddenly begins shaking the foundation beneath entire societies. And there are moments in the life of a people when the greatest danger is not open conflict, public anger, or instability itself. The greatest danger is psychological normalization. When suffering becomes familiar, when fear becomes routine, when grief becomes background noise, when moral exhaustion becomes mistaken for peace, when silence becomes the survival instinct of an entire society. That is the threshold towards which we are drifting. For years now, communities have buried loved ones while learning to continue functioning emotionally wounded. Families have adapted themselves to uncertainties. Children have grown up surrounded by instability severe enough to alter their psychological relationship with authority, security, and even hope itself. And let us be honest in this room. For almost 10 years now, most of you have not even been to your own communities. And even if you make the trip, you bundled in bulletproof vest, bunkered in armored vehicles, severely protected and separated even from the people you visiting and you pretend to address. You look strange. You look foreign. Normalization has come in frightening images to speak to a people traumatized, starved, homeless, and hopeless. No amount of official language, ceremonial symbolism, or carefully managed narratives can permanently conceal the emotional reality unfolding beneath our society. A population can comply outwardly while internally disconnecting from political order governing them. And once emotional legitimacy begins eroding deeply enough, societies enter dangerous territory because authority ultimately survives only through institutions and force, but through belief. Belief that the system is fair. Belief that tomorrow can improve. Belief that leadership sees the suffering of ordinary people. Believe that sacrifice can still carry meaning within our society. When those beliefs weaken long enough, societies do not immediately collapse. They begin slowly hardening psychologically against themselves. Distinguished participants, our peaceful societies and communities today witness daily bloodshed. We've never known anything about violence. Today we have men and women, boys and girls carrying arms, standing up to protect themselves from a state that, as most of your colleagues have spoken in your parliament, an army that is out there behaving like an army of occupation. Many of you in this room understand power immediately. You understand the architecture of political management, balancing of interest, the cultivation of loyalty, the distribution of access, the preservation of equilibrium through patronage, accommodation, and control stability. You understand how systems survive. But there is a deeper leadership truth that history repeatedly teaches. Systems rarely collapse because they lack intelligence. They weaken because leadership circles become psychologically trapped inside old assumptions long after society itself has changed. That is the danger confronting our society today. For years, difficult questions were deferred under the assumption that time itself would eventually reduce tension. But unresolved grievances do not disappear with time. They mature, they deepen emotionally, and eventually they transform from political complaints into identity level frustration rooted in memory, humiliation, exclusion, and generational anger. That transformation is already taking place. A younger generation has emerged that no longer measures legitimacy through appointments of a selected few, through ceremonies or symbolic representation alone. They are measuring legitimacy psychologically through dignity, fairness, through opportunity, through recognition, and through whether their lives possess value within our society itself. This shift is profound because once populations begin emotionally disengaging from the occupied political authority, maintaining stability becomes infinitely more fragile and expensive. Force can impose order temporarily, but force cannot manufacture emotional loyalty. Fear can suppress speech, but fear cannot create belonging. And propaganda may shape headlines briefly, but propaganda cannot permanently compete against lived experience. That is the deeper crisis now confronting all of us. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the recent call for justice, for dialogue, for peace and dignity did not manufacture these realities. It revealed them. They articulated publicly what millions have already been carrying privately within themselves for years. And this is why the current moment is consequential, because societies rarely disintegrate dramatically at first. They erode psychologically before they fracture politically. They erode when truth disappears from leadership environment. When elites begin protecting stability narratives more than social realities. When preserving access becomes more important than confronting danger. And when silence becomes rewarded while honesty risks being persecuted. This is how societies gradually drift towards long-term rupture while still operating functional on the surface. And history teaches something else equally important. When crises remain unresolved for too long, systems eventually stop managing the crisis, and the crisis begins managing the system. And this is what is happening today. The system is not managing crisis. The crisis is now managing the system. That transition is already becoming visible. You can feel it in the growing emotional distance between the colonial institutions and the occupied people, and the quiet despair spreading beneath public silence, in the normalization of instability, in the cynicism emerging among youth, and in the dangerous fatigue slowly overtaking the social consciousness of the people. Distinguished elites, this room contains individuals with immense influence, network, proximity to power, and the ability to shape outcomes. Which means this room also contains responsibility. Not responsibility for recklessness, not responsibility for disruption, as we've seen over the years, but a new responsibility. The responsibility to prevent irreversible psychological fracture between the occupied state and a significant portion of the people. And this requires a rarer form of leadership than politics usually demands. Not performative leadership, a transformational leadership. The kind of leadership capable of transcending fear, ego, factional loyalty, and short-term political calculation in order to confront reality before reality imposes itself catastrophically on everyone. This requires moral courage. The courage to speak truth inside environments where managed illusions have become normalized. The courage to acknowledge that sustainable peace cannot emerge solely from coercion. The courage to recognize that legitimacy cannot indefinitely be substituted with control. The courage to understand that leadership is not tested during periods of comfort, but during moments where confronting reality carries personal and political risk. Because make no mistake, the society is changing. The psychology of the population has changed. The expectations of younger generations has changed, and systems that fail to adapt to shifting political consciousness eventually encounter moments that they can no longer fully contain. This is not ideology. This is the recurrent lesson of history. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, for years now, this era will be studied carefully, and history will ask difficult questions of those who occupied positions of influence during this period. It will ask who recognized the warning signs, who understood the depth of the rupture, who hid behind comfort and silence, who protected the appearance, who protected appearances while society deteriorated beneath them, and who rose above self-preservation to act with courage, realism, and foresight. Because ultimately, this moment is no longer testing intelligence. It is testing character. It is testing whether leadership in this generation is capable of evolving from custodians of the status quo into architect of a new political imagination, into architect of dignity, of protection of political rights, of protection of history and heritage. And that transformation begins when influential people stop asking, how do we preserve what exists today? And begin asking, how do we prevent tomorrow from becoming irreparable? Distinguished elites, there is still time. Time to lower tension before bitterness hardens further. Time to create pathways for credible engagement and all-inclusive dialogue. Time to rebuild trust before emotional separation deepens irreversibly. Time to redirect our society towards a future grounded not in fear, but in legitimacy, in dignity, in inclusion, in coexistence, and political maturity. But history is also unforgiving towards a generation that mistake delay for strategy. Windows are closed, opportunities narrow, and a society that fails to confront reality early often confront it later, after, and under far harsher conditions. Distinguished elites, this is the moment, not merely to hold office, not merely to preserve influence, not merely to survive politically, but to elevate yourselves into something history remembers differently. Leaders who stepped forward while others retreated. Leaders who chose courage over comfort. Leaders who saw danger clearly and refused to surrender society to denial. Leaders who helped pull a society back from deeper fracture. Leaders who made a decisive impact precisely when it mattered the most. This is my invitation to all of you. This is the invitation history is placing before you all. Thank you. I'm honored for your kindness, for your attentiveness, and for what your souls and your hearts have listened. Before you were appointed, before you were recruited, before you were integrated, you were Southern Cameroonian. You were an Ambazonian. That has not changed. Thank you.